There can be two NFL drafts in one season. That's right. If you've been watching the NFL news or college football news, you may have heard that Brendan Sorsby from Texas Tech is declaring for the supplemental draft. But what is that? We're going to talk about that, the process, and if this is even worth doing coming up next here on No Buts About It. What's up, everyone? Thank you for tuning in to No Buts About It. I'm your host, Josh Butts. And before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any NFL news. So this video was kind of triggered by Texas Tech quarterback Brendan Sorsby declaring for the NFL Supplemental Draft. So we'll use him as an example at certain points, but this video isn't specifically about him. This is about just what the draft is and why it even exists. So first of all, the big question is, what is the supplemental draft? So the supplemental draft is a separate summer draft for players who missed the standard draft in April. They missed the filing deadline. They had their eligibility impacted after the deadline. This year's date to declare is June 22nd. So Brendan Sorsby would have had to, if he hadn't declared, he would have missed. So that's probably why he's declaring now, because there's expected to be a lot of legal stuff with his situation. So he's declaring now, just saying, I'm just going to go to the NFL, see what I can get out of that. And at the time of filming this, the supplemental draft has not been given a date. It's expected to happen in mid-July, though. Definitely before August, we will see that supplemental draft occur. And so that brings us to our next question. How often does the supplemental draft actually happen? It seems like it just kind of came out of nowhere. It's not very often talked about. Everyone just all of a sudden was like, Brendan Sorsby's going to the supplemental draft. And if you hadn't heard of the supplemental draft, don't worry, you're not alone in that. That's a very common thing, even among very big football fans. But now you know what it is. And by the end of this video, you'll be an expert. So it happens very rarely. Since it was initiated in 1977, only 46 players have been chosen through the supplemental draft process. The most recent one was in 2023. Wide receiver Milton Wright of Purdue and wide receiver Malachi Wideman of Jackson State both declared for the supplemental draft. However, neither were chosen. They both went on to become undrafted free agents. And that's important to note because, yes, players can declare for the supplemental draft and not be chosen. Teams do not have to pick a player. Also, these players have to be approved by the NFL. Like, I couldn't declare for the supplemental draft and get drafted or expect to be drafted. So there has to be an approval process. There has to be eligibility laws, stuff like that. The last player that was selected in a supplemental draft was in 2019. The Arizona Cardinals took safety Jalen Thompson with a 5th-round pick, and we're going to talk about what that means. But first, I want to talk about who is actually eligible for this draft. So first rule for who is eligible is you must be 3 years removed from high school. So you can't just come out of high school and be like, you know what, I don't want to do the whole college football thing. I'm just going to declare for the supplemental draft. Nope, must be removed 3 years from high school. You must have experienced sudden loss of eligibility or significant unforeseen changes after the April draft. So this can't just be like a guy saying, hey, I changed my mind. I don't actually want to do another year. They have to have lost their eligibility in some way, whether that be through academic, disciplinary, or legal complications that affected their college football eligibility, meaning they can't come back. The players cannot simply just change their mind and decide they want to go to the NFL in the middle of July. And the players are, again, approved on a case-by-case basis by the NFL. The NFL has to say, yes, okay, we see your situation. We understand why you want to do this. You can enter into the supplemental draft. So now that we know who can enter into the draft and what it is, how does this thing work? How does this NFL supplemental draft work? Well, first of all, the teams are broken up into 3 tiers. These 3 tiers are teams that won 6 or less games. Then the next tier is they won 7 or more games, but they did not make the playoffs. And then finally, we have the teams that made the playoffs. And then those teams are kind of put into a lottery system within those tiers, and they submit blind bids on what they value a player at. And they can only use picks that they have in the next draft. So this year, if you were to say Brendan Sorsby to me is worth a third-round pick, I would have to have a third-round pick in 2027 to bid that high. Same if it was a first, a second, a fourth. These are all picks that Brendan Sorsby could go for, and picks that have been used in previous supplemental drafts. But if you win that bid, you forfeit that pick in the next draft. So if I bid a third-round pick this year, say I'm the Giants, and I bid a third-round pick this year, then I would lose my third-round pick in the coming draft. So I would not have it. That it's essentially me making my pick a little bit before. I'm making it now instead of making it in April. So there's a little bit of a risk there. And again, teams are not required to make a bid. Or make a pick. So if you are just like, I'm not confident in Brendan Sorsby, I'm not confident in someone else you don't have to make a pick, and you can hope that he becomes an undrafted free agent. However, Brendan Sorsby is considered a very good prospect in terms of measurables. Now, obviously, he has some legal issues that led to this situation in the first place that would probably cause him to fall. But his measurables and just overall dual threat ability has him considered a first or second round prospect. Maybe he falls to the fourth because of those legal issues, but we will see. That's why he is such a prominent name in this situation, why people are even discussing the supplemental draft. If a team has multiple picks in one round, they must specify the pick they wish to use. So, for example, I believe the Cleveland Browns have 3 fourth-round picks next draft in 2027. So they cannot toss up a fourth-round pick and say, hey, actually, we meant this other one. We didn't mean that one. We want to use no. They have to say we're using the one that we got from this trade with this team. Or they have to specify it because the value is important, and we're going to get to that as well. And that gets into our next question. How do contracts work? These guys got to get paid who get picked. So when a player is picked, if a player is picked, they get whatever contract the player in the regular draft that season got at that pick. So all the pick contracts are slotted, right? So say if after the lottery order is determined, the team that picks a player has round 2, they put a round 2 pick in for a round 2 bid for this player, and then they slot it out to pick 7. Just an example. I don't know how the math works out on that. Just work with me. That player would get the same contract as Denzel Boston because he was picked in round 2, pick 7 in 2026. So it just matches up. You just match it up with that player. So he would just get that contract, right? So I think that made sense, but it's just basically matching it to wherever that team's pick fell the pick before, or the year before. It's pretty simple, not super complicated. Then now, is there this process? It kind of seems like we get to the day 3 of the NFL draft and kind of get into maybe not necessarily caring as much. I still care because I think it's interesting for depth and such. But have any notable players come out of this late, last minute, last resort draft, supplemental draft, whatever you want to call it? Yes, actually, and it's probably some names you recognize. And this is not an exhaustive list. Remember, only 46 players have been taken. So some examples. The Browns took Bernie Kosar with a first in 1985 after he graduated after his junior year and lost his college eligibility. The Eagles actually took Hall of Fame wide receiver Chris Carter with a 4th round in 1987 after he was suspended from Ohio State for signing with an agent. So that was a steal for the Eagles and ended up being a steal for the Vikings as well. The Cowboys took quarterback Steve Walsh with a first in 1989 after he did not declare for the draft before the draft deadline. So he, maybe not the best career, but he had a very long career. He spent a lot of time in the NFL. The Bengals ended up taking Linebacker Ahmad Brooks with a third in 2006. He was dismissed from his college team ahead of the supplemental draft deadline and was able to enter the draft in 2006. Another big quarterback name that you may recognize, the Raiders took Terrell Pryor with a third in 2011 after he was suspended as part of an NCAA investigation into improper benefits. You're going to notice he ended up on the Browns. You're going to notice the Browns are active quite a bit in these supplemental drafts. Obviously took Bernie Kosar. They're in the running as a name to possibly take Brendan Sorsby. But they are probably, just thinking back, they are probably one of the most, if not the most active team in the supplemental draft throughout history. And who else do we have next? Josh Gordon. Browns took wide receiver Josh Gordon with a second-round pick in 2012 after a failed marijuana test. And then finally, the most recent player to be drafted, we have safety Jalen Thompson. He was taken with a fifth by the Cardinals after he was declared ineligible for senior season due to a rules violation. He ended up having 87 career starts so far for the Cardinals, and now he is with the Cowboys. The Cardinals did give him an extension at one point as well. So there is a lot of really good players that have come out of this supplemental draft. Let me know what you think about the draft down below. Hopefully you are now an expert and you can talk about it and you know what's actually happening. But yeah, let me know how you think Brendan Sorsby will do, what you think about this supplemental draft. Did you know about the supplemental draft before this video? Did you know about it before Brendan Sorsby? All great questions, and you can answer them right down below. It helps us out with the algorithm. So thank you so much for checking out our channel, and until next time, go do something nice for someone.